Okay, so with the camera track sorted, I'm just going to go ahead and add an additional one in there, and I'm just going to move this onto the top of here. I think should be sufficient, and I'm just going to make these sections a little bit shorter as well. So one thing to note with the spline mesh is if you actually have a point selected and you press T, it can reset the handles. So if you were to rotate it like that and then press T, it kind of snaps it again, so it tries to smooth it out based on the previous 2 points. If you are wanting it to be linear, so there's no smoothing on it, if you select the point and press Shift T, that will make it kind of like a hard corner. Press T again, it'll add the handles back in so you can rotate it. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now, so that'll be sufficient enough for our sort of testing. I'll quickly save that. So the blueprint we need to create a new blueprint that's going to handle the switching to and from the different tracks. So I'm going to head to the camera track folder, and I'm going to create a new blueprint class, and that's going to be of type actor. And I'm going to head and call this BP underscore camera track switcher. Of course, you can name this whatever you like, so just name it something accordingly. And I have no idea why it's gone really small. Let's bring that up to the top. Okay, so in terms of this particular blueprint, there's kind of a few ways that you can kind of use it, set it up. What I'm going to do is go ahead and add a box collision to this component as the default. Just leave it like that. You don't need to necessarily do anything else with it at this particular point. Once we've done that, we want to go ahead to the event graph. So there are a few things that we're going to have to do in here. I'm going to start by just deleting all the nodes that come in there to start with. So the first thing that we need to do is actually handle when the player character overlaps with this particular actor. So what we can do is if we right click in the main event graph and we want to do the actor begin overlap. So it should be the event actor begin overlap. And then while we're here, we'll quickly add the other one in, so the actor end overlap. And what these do is essentially triggers whenever something overlaps any of the components that has the relevant collision channels activated, which is what we want, because ultimately the idea is that once this is in the level, you can actually add additional sort of collision components to it, and you can move those where they're needed to trigger the particular overlap events. So with that done, the other actor on the output there on the event, this is what's overlapped it. So what we want to do is actually check to make sure this is the player character. So what we can do is actually just do a cast to the third person character. If you've got a different character in your level, you can use that one. Alternatively, if you've got multiple characters, assuming they're all sort of stem from a base class, you can do that. Alternatively, the next thing that you can do is potentially cast to the character instead, and then get the controller, and then cast to the player controller, like so. So you can kind of use this to check if it's a player character or not. In this particular example, as we're just using the third person character, using this is perfectly fine, just because there's not going to be anything else that's going to be using the third person character. As I mentioned though, if you do have more complex characters, that some of them which might be AI controlled or things like that, then you would need to check to see if it's actually controlled by the player, and the easiest way to do that is just to get the controller and then cast the player controller. Having said that, I think there is a control is locally controlled. Alternatively, you can use is locally controlled. Your mileage with that may vary, particularly if you're doing local multiplayer, but either of these will be sufficient, so you can use whichever method you want on this particular example. So with the onBegin overlap, so we cast to the third person character, and just want to do exactly the same thing for the end overlap as well. And this is just to make sure that it's the player that's ending the overlap. So once we've done that, so the first function that we actually want to create is switching to the camera. So what we can do, we'll go ahead and create a new function. I'm going to call this one switch to linked cam, like so. And then we want to add an input onto this. I'm just going to call this character. And for the type, again, I was going to use the third person character, just because that's going to be the input that we put into it. So if we go back to the event graph, we can drag that in, and if assuming the cast succeeds, we can then just connect the input into the character. If you are using one of the other sort of options, you may need to change the input here to match. If you're using the option where it's like a character and you're checking to see if it's locally controlled, that type of thing, again, you just want to use possibly just the character reference. There will be a few things later on that we will check that you may then need to possibly use a different method to get that information. So what we can do now is in the switch to linked cam, if we get the reference to the character that we're inputting on the function, so we do get character, and because this is the third person character, we want to get the current camera track. So we just do get camera track. So this is the camera track that we set inside the third person character. So this one here. So it checks for the main camera track and it sort of sets it up in there. So that's what it's looking for. As mentioned, if you're not using the third person character, using your own, or it's different characters, you may need to use something like a blueprint interface to be able to get those that particular reference. Once we've done that, what we want to do is drag from the character and we want to get the controller. And sorry, actually 1 second. So from the camera track, if we pull from that and we just want to promote that to a variable, I'm going to call this one old track. So the reason we're doing that is so when the player leaves the bounding box, we've got a reference to what it was previously, so it can switch back to that one. So with that reference saved there to the old one, we can get the controller from the character, and we do want to cast to the player controller. Okay, and once we've done that, we can pull from the output on here, and we can do the set view target with blend. So that's similar to what we do in the third person character in that use main camera track function. So this particular one, so for the new view target, we want to create a variable for that. So I'm just going to call this a linked track. And that needs to be the BP camera track. That's going to be an object reference. You do want to make it instance editable as well. And the reason why is so when we then place the switch in the level, so it'll be in this instance it'll be over here, in the details panel on the right, you'll actually be able to select the object. So any camera track that's currently placed in the level, it should show up in the list. And you also have the handy pick actor from scene, so you'll be able to select the camera track switcher, click the little eyedropper, and then you'll be able to click on the camera track that you want it to link to. So in this case, the one that's on top of this hill here. So I've gone ahead and done that now, so as you can see it's already linked. And then we can just connect the linked track to the new view target. So the set view target with blend, it will automatically find the first camera within the actor and it'll set the view target to that. The next thing we want to do is the blend time. So I'm just going to go ahead and promote that to a variable. I'm just going to call it blend time. and I'm going to set this to default bar of 0.5 seconds. So this just controls how quickly it's going to move to the new camera. If it's 0, then it'll be instant. If you set it to 2 seconds, then it'll sort of gradually move to the new position over 2 seconds. You then have the blend function. So at the moment it's linear, so it's just going to switch over 1 second at a constant speed. And there are a few different options that you can choose from. Just a case of picking whichever you think's the nicest for your particular project. I know the cubic one tends to be quite nice, so I'm just going to use that one. The blend that's the exponent. That just controls the type of curves if you're choosing one of the curve options, so you can play around with that if you want to. And then the lock outgoing. So this can be quite useful because it can stop sort of weird jerkiness when you're switching to and from cameras quite quickly, particularly if it's not finished to blend already. So for this, I'm going to take that to true by default. Again, it's one of those things you can have a play around with to see what's sort of best for your particular project. So with that done, what we then need to do is get the old track, so we get reference to that. And assuming that's valid, we want to set the cam owner. So set cam owner. And we just want to leave it like that. So because we don't put an input on the character, it's going to set the cam owner within the old track to null, which effectively will stop it from updating its camera, which is what we want. What we then need to do is the linked track, we want to do exactly the same thing. So we want to set the camera owner. And this time we want to do it to the character that we've inputted to the function. So I'm just going to copy that from the left-hand side. Like so. So if the old track is not valid, we also want to call that same function. So it should look a little bit something like that. Okay, so right now that should be working. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to the level, and with the blueprint selected, the track switcher, I'm just going to select the box inside the component, and I'm just going to make the size of that box a little bit bigger. And then just position it a little bit better. Like so. Now if we actually test this, so if we move over, the moment we get up into the box, it should switch the camera and it'll start using that particular one. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. At the moment we don't have it set up to handle leaving the box, so it does stay on this particular one, but if you notice it does move around on that particular track as well. Okay, so let's go back to the track switcher, and this time we will sort out the other function for switching back to the old camera. The old camera track. So I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this one switch to old cam. And this particular one is going to be very similar in a sense. So what we want to do is add another input onto that, and that's going to be the third person character again. Again, as a reminder, if you're not using the third person character, then you just need to update this accordingly based on what sort of thing you're using. I'm going to call this character. And again, so we've got the character reference, character. And we want to get the controller. And the reason why is because we need to cast to the player controller again. So cast to player controller. And then once we've done that, we just want to get to the old track and we want to convert that to a validated gap. So we just want to check to see if the old track is actually valid or not. So the reason why is because in the third person character, if you remember, we did add the use main cam track. So if this is false, then the camera track will never be set in here. And if that's the case, what we actually want it to do is to switch back to the camera in the third person character itself. So it's actually quite a versatile method that would actually allow you to kind of get a mix of third person. Oh, we've just got a crash. Let me quickly restart that. Okay, so yeah, so sorry about that. So as I was saying, the use main camera track, it actually allows for some versatility in the sense that you can kind of have a mix of third person and fixed cameras. So it looks like some of the things didn't quite save, so I'm just going to quickly add the camera track switcher back into the level and just link that back up and make this a bigger again. There we go, that'll be sufficient. So at the moment I've got the use main cam track disabled, so at the moment it's just standard third person, but then the moment you come into the box it starts to use that camera. So you can sort of use it as a way of kind of adding a little extra depth to sort of your camera controls. There could be certain areas that when the player enters them it goes to like a fixed camera. So yeah, so the possibilities there in terms of what you want it to do. So because that might not sometimes be set depending on how you got it set up, we do need to account for that within the camera track switcher itself. So what we can do is from the player controller we can do this set view target with blend if it's valid, and the new target is going to be the old track. Like so. At this point it's just a case of choosing the same settings that you had previously on when we're switching to the camera track. Some of these functions you might want to do as variables, so you can just plug them straight in. The next thing we want to do, once we've done the view target, we want to get the linked track. So this is the one that we set it to when we entered. And we want to set the owner of that, the cam owner, and we want to set that back to null. Again, that's to stop that particular component from ticking. And next we want to do the same thing with the old camera track. Well, similar with the old camera track, but this time want to use the character reference that's the input on the function. And finally on this particular execution chain, once we've done that we can then set the old track to null, so that just clears that out. Okay, so we've almost done in this particular section. So the next thing we need to deal with is when the old track itself isn't valid. So we still want to set the view target. The only thing that's going to be different here is the reference that we use as the new view target is going to be the character reference. So this will just make it look for the first camera it finds within the third person character. And finally, we just want to, on the linked camera, we just want to set that to null as well, just like so. Okay, so now that should be working. So if we come up here and we enter the volume, you can see it's starting to use the track. And then the moment we leave, it does nothing because I've not connected the function. If you spotted that, well done. So quickly try that one again. So as we enter the volume, it starts moving, and then when we leave the volume, it switches back to the default camera. Like so. So in terms of the system itself, that's pretty much sorted. As you can see, the whole thing's functional. There is, however, one last thing that I do want to just add to the camera track. And I'm going to demonstrate what this is going to do. So if I was to come to this particular point and say move the player start inside a volume, like so, and then press play, it's not going to work, which is in itself is going to be a little bit annoying. If I leave, it's going to attempt to switch back to the old one, but it doesn't have an effect. But then if I enter, it will start working. So what we need to do on the camera switcher, particularly on the begin play, is just accommodate, do a quick check to see if the character's already inside the camera switcher bounds when the levels sort of load essentially, or the camera switcher. So what we can do, if we add the event begin play a node to the event graph. And what I'm going to do is add a delay for next tick. Now, the reason why I want to do that is just to give chance for the character themselves to actually have spawned in the level. Sometimes it can be a bit of a load order. It might be a case that the camera switcher loads before the third person character, in which case this would kind of be redundant. But if we just delay it till next tick, we know at that particular point, unless you've got some other logic in there for delaying the camera spawning, the third person character spawning, we know it's always going to be the next tick. So what we can do is then if we get overlapping actors, and you want to make sure it's the one where the target is actor. So you can do one that's just for the box, but we want to do the actors. So that's going to do, it's going to check for anything that's overlapping any of the components within this particular actor, which is what we want. For the class filter, that's just going to be third person character. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not using the third person character and you're using something else, you kind of just need to choose the best option for this. If it's not it could be very well be that they're all extended from character, so you might need to use that instead, and then just do some additional checks to see if it's controlled by a player. So once we've got those actors, we can then do is not empty. So if it is empty, then it doesn't matter. We can kind of ignore that. So we grab a branch from there. So yeah, so if it's false, which means it's empty, we don't want to do anything. If it's not empty and there is something in it, then what we can do is get the first reference in the array. If you are going to have multiple actors, particularly if you're trying to use this in multiplayer, you might have to do that a little bit differently. You might have to loop through them and find the one that's locally controlled on the machine. Okay, and once we've done that, we can just cast that to the third person character. Like so. And then we just want to set the link to the cam. So it's exactly the same as we did down here. The only difference is we're just doing a kind of like a pre-check just to see if anything's actually overlapping. So if we come back to the level now and then we'll test, you can see it's starting to work there. Okay, so there was a little bit of snapping in there. Let's have a quick look. So on the camera switcher, the blend time, if we make that instance editable, we can adjust that. So let's set that to 10 seconds. I have an feeling, yeah. Okay, yeah, so it's moving the camera all the way from there, okay, which is not ideal. So we'll set that back to 0.5. So what I'm actually going to do is just add on the switch to linked cam. I'm just going to add a quick input on there of a bool. I'm just going to call this one be instant, like so. And then on the blend time, I'm just going to do a select float and connect that instant variable. So if it's instant, pick A, we want the blend time to be 0. Otherwise, we want that to be whatever the blend time is that we've set. Now the reason I've done that is so if we go back to the event graph, on the one that's on the begin play, if we tick that box, it's going to work slightly different to this one here. So now, that also wasn't instant. Why wasn't that instant? Okay, yes, I'm not actually quite sure on how best to actually resolve that particular issue. As far as I can see, we do set the location to what it should be, but it's still lerping along that location for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why. It does look like it's only confound to when placed inside the volume, so it might just be something you have to live with. If you yourselves figure out what the problem is and how to fix it, be sure to let me know. So what I'm going to do now, so the system itself is set up at this point, as you can see. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to jump back to my previous project, one of my personal projects that I showed at the start of the video. And I'm just going to show you how it is I've set the cameras up in that particular level to give you a bit more of an idea of how you can then actually use what it is that you've created essentially. So I'll be back in a second. Okay, so here we are. So this is the same level that I was in at the beginning. So in this particular level, I have one camera track here that goes down the middle. So that's kind of like the main track that sort of the player would generally run along. I then have a track that runs along the back side here, another one on the other side, and then there is a fourth one that runs down at the bottom. So this is sort of a straight track with a bit of a curve section in it. As for the side pieces, that sort of curls up around the corner. So these are some of the settings. It's like speed 2, most of them. Obviously you can adjust the offsets and things. The only one that is the main track is just the one in the middle, so the others are as they are. Now I have 3 track switches, one for each of the non-main ones. So one down at the bottom and then some at the sides. So for us to pick this side, there is a lot more components in here. So in the one that we created, it has just the box in it. And then what I've done in the editor itself, so once it's been placed in the level, you have it selected and you come up to the little add button and you can actually add additional components to it. So box, capsule, sphere, and that will add them to the root, which you can then move around and adjust the sphere sizes as you wanted to, and they'll appear in the list. And because you're adding these in the editor at this particular point, and it's not specific to the blueprint, you can have different instances with different objects in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and destroy that one. So for me, I have one that enters this section here, another one that sort of encompasses this entire corridor, and then have 2 capsules for the circular sections, another box but one that's angled to accommodate for the slope, and then I even include an additional one in the middle, so if the player decides to jump across, it's not going to switch the camera back to the default one. So again, what I'll do is I'll quickly jump in and I'll sort of show you how that can sort of look with this particular camera track. So we get to the end, it kind of stops, it sort of follows the camera across the bridge. So if we go up here, the moment we enter this section, it's switching the camera to follow up this camera track. Similarly, if we go down here, it's still following on that specific track. Because the volume is still in the middle, if we jump across, it's not going to switch straight back. If we jump down, it's going to switch the camera to where it needs to go. And if you remember, there was the one that goes down here. So again, enter the volume and it's switching to it. Let's see if I can do the jump. Yeah, and then when you leave the area, it switches back to the main cam again. So yeah, so that's how you can make a fixed camera system for your projects. So if you like the video, be sure to leave a like and drop me a comment on and let me know what sort of project it is that you're using it on. So yeah, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.